Dear ambassadors, mediation experts, colleagues, and friends, I have the great pleasure to welcome you to the third Tête-à-tête on behalf of the Women Peace Mediators Network Germany. We hereby continue the tradition of bringing peace experts together to inspire us with their conversation. This time, we welcome Dr. Annette Weber and Nisreen Elsaim on Sudan, where one of the world's bloodiest wars is in its 10th month, while the public focus is on Gaza and Ukraine. But before handing over to our two distinguished guests, let me briefly introduce you to our small, but no less powerful network. The network represents highly experienced mediators from Germany who work in and on conflicts in Afghanistan, Yemen, Colombia, Ukraine, Ethiopia, or the Western Balkans. We all have experience in high-level political processes, be it from the perspective of a multilateral organization, the diplomatic service, a peace mission, or academia. We, of course, advocate for more women envoys, more women at the negotiating table, and more female expertise in processes to reach fair representation and to increase the likelihood of sustainable peace. Whenever we are asked whether we know of a knowledgeable and competent woman, expert, or politician, we use our network and the networks around us and do our best to quickly provide suitable names. Thus, I can only encourage you to ask us should there be a need. To come to our second goal, we all share the experience that method matters. Whether I first encourage new elections or focus on constitutional reform is not an easy question, as we all know. From research on peace processes, we know how eye-opening it can be to look at this very question, not only from a political, but also from a methodological perspective. Thus, since our foundation 4 years ago, we as a network also promote more methodological expertise in peace processes and call for the analysis of past processes to be taken seriously. Questions like this, whether to go for elections or constitutional reform, are also the subject of our regular network meetings. I don't think I exaggerate when I say that we all benefit from this highly professional exchange. Thus, we have also become an efficient learning network. With this in mind, I would like to realize another of our traditions, which is introducing one of our members to you in each of our events. This time, I proudly hand over to Lakshmi Vimalaraja, senior mediation expert with a lot of experience in preparing negotiating parties for the table. Lakshmi, the floor is yours. You're muted, Lakshmi.
Okay. A classical thing. Good afternoon, warm greetings from Berlin. My name is Lakshmi Raja. I'm a senior mediation advisor at the Berkhoff Foundation, an international peace-building NGO specialized on peace mediation, peace education, and peace research. I'm currently involved in a discrete process in the European neighborhood. Previously, I supported several peace negotiations at track 1 and 1.5 levels, starting from Sri Lanka to Nepal, Myanmar, the Basque Country, Yemen, Turkey, and North Macedonia. As a mediation practitioner scholar, my work is centered around 3 main areas. Firstly, providing negotiation support to key conflict parties in negotiations, be it states or armed movements. Particularly in the early phases of negotiations, my services are usually sought after when parties grapple with the question of how to end an armed conflict and start negotiations. It's often easier to start a war than to end a war, as we know. So concretely, my work ranges from supporting back-channel negotiations to shuttle mediation, supporting confidence-building measures, training and building capacities of conflict parties in negotiations. Secondly, providing mediation support to third parties, be it special envoys or multilateral organizations involved in mediation, enhancing their skills and methodological knowledge to navigate complex negotiation processes, which are often, as we know, fraught with risk and with deadlocks. Lastly, as a scholar advancing concepts and practical guidance on mediation. My current area of research is around constitutions and mediation. I joined the Women Peace Mediators Network Germany roughly 1.5 years ago. As Julia already outlined, this is really a special network in many ways. It's self-funded and driven by intrinsically motivated and amazing, brave women mediators. For me personally, this network has been an incredible source of inspiration and motivation. It's not easy to talk about peace mediation today when the world is busy rearming itself, where violence is seen as the first resort and not the last. With recklessness and full impunity, wars are waged with no restraint and no concern to civilian lives or to international roles, principles, and norms, as we see in Sudan and elsewhere. So obviously one could argue that peacemakers are needed now than ever before, but one could also ask, where have we all gone wrong? Individually and collectively as a field? Why have we not been able to provide timely and effective responses to the current crisis and prevent actually the outbreak of wars in the first place? So this network has been a space where such methodological questions are raised, discussed, and ideas shared. So for members like me of this network, the added value is clear. But how can Germany and other states, insider mediators in local contexts, and also conflict parties benefit from the vast experience and expertise of the members of the network? Reach out to Women Mediators Germany network. When you're looking for experienced women mediators, looking for peer support or process design support, or even skills support. Now with this, let me hand over the floor to Christina, one of the founding members of the WPMG, to introduce the format of our conversation on Sudan.
Yes, hello and welcome from my side. I'm Christina Horvath-Stenner, and also, as Lakshmi said, a member of the WPM Network Germany. I have actually the pleasure to introduce you to our very two special guests and expert on Sudan. But before I do that, let me kindly recall what a tête-à-tête means for us, the WPM Network. It is a very special format where we always bring mediation experts, be they renowned or high level, or like today, both, together. And we would like to have an unfacilitated, uninterrupted time with them, but we are rather in the back. There's no structure, there's no facilitation from our side. So we have all the same chance. So we are also the audience and can play the fly on the wall when two experts have a normal conversation and hopefully even an intimate conversation. So we take the insights very serious and are very excited now to listen in. At today's tête-à-tête, let me welcome EU Special Representative Dr. Annette Weber. Dr. Annette Weber, who is the Special Representative of the EU to the Horn of Africa and a true geographical and mediation expert since the beginning of her career, I would actually say. She has previous working assignments with the Berko Foundation and with the HD Center, and her previous post was with the SWP Foundation in Germany on international and security issues. And she has published, and it's really worthwhile to go through her bibliography. She has published numerous articles and papers on the Horn of Africa and its conflicts. And what struck me actually, Dr. Weber, was that it always hints a bit of optimism and a bit of out-of-the-box thinking when you write about this region. Let me also get her on the screen for a second. And even, I know it sounds dry to some, it's worthwhile, and I can recommend looking up her dissertation for her PhD online, which is not dry at all and gets into substance on the gendered matters around female fighters and the reintegration into society. Not dry at all, I can highly recommend, just actually skim through her dissertation. And then I warmly welcome Nisreen Elsaim from Sudan. She is a peace and climate activist. She recently described herself as a climate workaholic and conflict preventer, which I really liked. She's a scientist by nature. However, she over the years discovered, and with some serious incidents happening in Sudan, that she has to go into politics to really change something in her society. However, I'm sure physics is a very good basis still to connect to people around the world. She also was the UNSG chair of the Youth Advisory Group on climate change until 2023 and is running her own youth climate activist network and group. Nisreen, if you allow me, I would like to share two quotes you recently did. One was that armies are actually often one of the biggest polluters in a specific region, which struck me and links to your activism regarding climate. But you also mentioned that women always build the peace, but never get the jobs. And that also reminded me of how many NGOs or movements all over the world are run and led by women, and how few track one mediator or negotiator positions are fulfilled with women. So with that, I would like to hand over to the both of you and actually wonder, and I just give this into your hands to pick up or not, but whose responsibility is it actually to include? So with this, I hand over to you, a negotiator and a mediator, and thank you very much in advance already.
Thank you, Christina. Nisreen, how are you?
Fine, Annette. How are you?
Well, busy in the field of working on conflicts, let's say. But what do you think? Is there an answer to who is responsible for inclusion?
Yeah, I think, and thank you, Christina, for the introduction. I'm not into politics yet. but I'm I'm into policy, which is the level before.
I hope it's coming soon.
Well, let's see. Let's have a country first, then worry about politics. Yes, it's of course great to be with you again, Annette, and regarding the responsibility, it's actually everyone's responsibility. Let's have it on different segments and different sectors. For example, when you say, I want a body that is 40% represented by women, and this is exactly what happened in our transitional government in Sudan before the war. You don't give ways to actually go around it by giving excuses for not bringing women to the leadership. For example, if they said no, if they're not ready, etc., etc. I mean, 40% is, for example, 40%. Although I'm not very much fan of the quota process, I'm more fan of affirmative action. Yeah, but I think it's the responsibility of everyone. But going back to you, and maybe the European continent is doing a bit better than the African continent in terms of women inclusion and so on. Although in Sudan we had a very progressed women leadership processes in the 50s and the 60s. We had equal payment, we have maternity leave, and we had a lot of labor laws that actually favor women since the 60s and 50s, and we had women driving cars, first judge, first movie director, first member in the parliament also, and these were like really progressive comparing to the European movement, but then things changed over time. And let me take it a bit personal for you. How was your personal fight as a woman in this field in Europe, for example?
I think, what you just said in terms of how things have changed in Sudan since the 60s, I think what we see everywhere in the world, and of course in Europe as well, you would always hope it's a linear progress. Yeah, you start somewhere, you build up, and then there's paradise at the end. Of course, that's not the case. And I think this is really, what we see in Germany, what we see in Europe right now. It's reminding us things can fall apart quickly, not fall apart, but really, I mean, backlash is not just a word. And you cannot just let go. And I think this is coming back to the question of who is responsible, as you said, everyone, because I think what I've learned maybe in the 80s, 90s is if you don't do it on all levels, on the personal level, on the political level, on the family, on, the university where you work, no one is ever giving power to you. It's always a struggle. It always needs to be, demanded and called for. But you should also, you cannot just be satisfied if you climb the ladder. If it's not becoming a collective effort, basically it's not worth anything. And I think what you said about Sudan, 60s, 70s, but of course it's also Sudan in 2019. No, I mean the revolution was not a revolution done by the military. It was a revolution done by the civilians, by women. And where are they now? And I think this is really the question. Christina spoke about my PhD before. So my question in my PhD was SPLA and EPLF. You had female fighters. What happened? What happened in Eritrea? You had 40% female fighters. And suddenly they're not seen as full-fledged citizens anymore, and they're not part of the decision-making. I think this is really the question where I, of course, would answer as a political scientist and a German European. You need representation, you need affirmative action, you need, democracy, you need to keep that level. But it's not so easy. And I think this is really, a very important question right now in Sudan. How do we get inclusivity, including women having not just a voice, but really being reflected throughout the process? Because, sometimes we call for meetings and say, please ensure that women are participating. But that's not good enough, because if they're participating, sitting there without leading the conversation, if they're just given, half a minute to also say something additional that only concerns women, then this is not transformative. And I think, to me, the lesson I have learned, if you don't transform, if it's just an additional voice, it's not helping. I don't know how you see it in the current situation.
Yes, I totally agree with you. But the thing that I learned from my activism in Sudan and the work we did with women over the years, that there is normally 3 main pillars for not including women enough in mediation, but also in the negotiation. And one of these pillars is actually doable, is actually fixable, which is the capacities. Although no one actually questioned the capacity of the men. I know a lot of men who are there without enough capacities, but if it's valid and if it's for the good for the women participation itself, then why not? Why not working? And now we have an opportunity. There is a lot of opening windows for actually women inclusion from the beginning, and preparing for Sudan post-war from now, by enabling them to be part of the meetings, of the decision processes, of the different spheres, and by, of course, building the capacities, but of course mapping. Because now some people are saying there is not enough women, which is of course hilarious and silly from my perspective. There is always enough women, but there is not enough seats to cover all of the grid. But since you mentioned the inclusivity in Sudan, and let's take it more broader perspective, what will be an inclusive process for the peace in Sudan from an EU perspective or from an ETA perspective? What are the red lines of inclusivity? What should inclusivity mean in or mean out? Because of course inclusivity cannot be obsolete.
Maybe 2 things. Before I answer your question, because I think you said something quite important, and it's really about preparing the post-war. Because if we stuck to the today, I think we are missing the point. We're missing the point because we're staring at 2 generals as if the future of Sudan is really written in their book, but it needs to be written in all of your books. And this brings it back to inclusivity. For us right now, I think, having a civilian front that is inclusive, where you basically have one condition: to join the process, not to join a party, not to join a group, not to join, a movement, but to join a process where basically the first step is, okay, let's get rid of this war and let's work towards a civilian government. I think that to me is the first part where I see we need to see more diversity reflected in the process. That doesn't mean that, of course, whatever is happening post-political process, in the different movements, in the resistance committees, in the youth movements, in the women's movements, that doesn't mean that there the work begins. The work of inclusivity begins. The work begins in the political parties, who is leading a party, who is leading a movement. But right now, to me, the process, I think a simple gatekeeper function would be: I'm against the war and I'm pro a civilian transition. Not I'm left, right, I'm from whatever. But of course also, and I think this could be helping also for the diversity from a geographical position. I believe, and I think we've been discussing this quite often. If the civilian front concentrates on the center, then of course it cannot be strong enough, because this war is showing that the center cannot hold. The center did not hold this time. So it really needs to bring the various peripheries, and I think this is really it's a challenge that we should all it's a challenge for all of us. It's not just a challenge for Takadum. It's not just a challenge for the civilians in Sudan. It's also a challenge, who can be in, who can be out. Only the Sudanese can decide. But in our understanding as EU, and you've been part of some of our conversations, we always felt very strongly that we also need to bring those in who might not fully agree, with the one political party, or who might not be 100% pro the idea of democracy that we might consider, to be the right democracy right now, but that we need to bring, or you need to bring in people to reflect upon the population of Sudan. But of course, not everyone, not those who want to fight the war, not those who basically want to go back, to the Bashir area. And I think this is, in my understanding, it's basically agreed upon, but it seems to be quite hard for the Sudanese, at least in Taqadum, to open up. And that's a question really, what do you think can be done to have a more inclusive civilian front that can be stronger, to call upon, not just upon, but to call on the two generals to stop the war, but that also has to be more inclusive. What do you think needs to be done to get this?
Actually, for me, and I think I've shared this before, the question of inclusivity right now is not the right question. Because, as you mentioned, everyone who are against the war at the moment is part of this process that we are aiming to do to stop the war. And inclusivity doesn't really mean a political party or an ethnic group or anything. It means that everyone who are working towards the new Sudan, far from al-Bashir era, of course, far from the war era, of course, again, and towards a democratic civilian government. But the question from the beginning for me, and I noticed this from a lot of different meetings with different stakeholders, is not the question of how to be inclusive, but who to lead this inclusivity. I think the question of leadership is always there. And I think for a long time, a lot of stakeholders have been holding this leadership. And I think one of the very important steps that we need to do right now is to put women and youth in the leadership. I've seen a very nice video of a very old lady from northern Sudan. She can't even, I think she's used to use more the local languages, so her Arabic is not even the best. But she's saying that we give men too many opportunities to lead this country. And every time we are getting out from a big hole to a well, and then from another well to even deeper well. So I think, and this is in her perspective, she was saying it's time for women to take the lead and do it. And of course, I share this. I think it's time for new blood, new faces, but of course, new mentality to lead, because as Einstein said before, it's very stupid to repeat the same experience and expect different and new results. Another question from my side will be, how can we actually help young people and women to be this leadership and to be this new face, new blood plus new mentality for the new Sudan?
Oh, I think it's a profound question, because I very much agree. The mindset is key. So it's not just the representation; it's also what people represent and what kind of collective effort they're looking for. Or are they looking for individual power? Now, in questions of leadership, you very often end up with people who look for individual power rather than collective. Working towards a collective change. I think you mentioned in the beginning, empowerment and skills training, and I think all of this is key. But of course, the power is still there. I mean, the question of power and power struggle in the movements is still there. So, how much can the movement? Let's stick with Taqadum, with the civilian front we have right now. How much can the movement do right now? You mentioned it's 40% quota, but everyone finds excuses why this is not possible, that's not possible, we don't have enough seats, what can be done from inside? What kind of backing do you also need to position more women? And what can be done from outside? And I think, one issue, of course, is not just a request, but a demand. We only meeting you if there are women in the team. But going through so many meetings where, someone brings along a woman, just to show us as EU or others that there is a woman in the team. that's not enough. So clearly that also needs to, we also need to change the attitude in terms of what kind of questions are we asking? What kind of questions on realities on the ground are we asking? What are our concerns? But I believe, you know, Sudan, you're so well placed after the revolution to, you know, it's not like people are shy to see women in leadership. But what does it take inside to get out of this quota thinking into a realization of why is it necessary? Because I think if we just stick to the power and representation, then it might just become a question of putting women in places. The question you ask on the mindset, I think, is important to me. Now, I'm not of the opinion that women are more peaceful, but I'm of the opinion that women have a different mindset because they have different tasks, and they ask, you know, I mean, they have like a multitude of care jobs and a multitude of political decision making that doesn't put them normally so much in the fore, and they do need to take decisions for more than themselves. And it reminds me, on the last war in Darfur, I was working for Amnesty, and we did interviews in Darfur, and we did interviews in Chad, and the women were saying, well, you know, we were very slow because of course I had to carry my mother and then the kids and the elderlies and those who were sick. And I was asking naively, where are the men? And they said, well, we let them go through a different path because they need to be protected. And, you know, knowing the war in Darfur, it was not just a war against men. Of course, it was a war against the entity of civilians. But it was so, you know, it was such a realization for me that these women, this is 20 years ago, I don't think it's different now. These women come with the full responsibility of half a village, but no one expects them to, you know, take these skills forward to negotiate, to get to the political process, to challenge the armed movements or to lead in the armed movements. And I think this is really the question of mindset that I think is a big question. I don't know if anyone in this group has an answer, but I think it's something where, yes, we need to have collective efforts to do skills training, to demand and to request more women in these meetings, but of course also on the other side, you know, to bring that change of mindset.
Yeah, I think also, since we are mentioning the mindset, let's maybe give the broad audience a little bit of a historical background on what's happening in Sudan, basically. So unfortunately, Sudan is a country where we are moving actually from one dictatorship to another, for several years. And just a second, sorry. Yeah, sorry, room reallocation thing. Anyway, yes. So and then we ended up with this is the near history, a coup from the Islamist group backed by the army in 1889. And that rule by the dictatorship lasted for 30 years until we had a revolution in December 2018 that ended up by removing al-Bashir in 11th of April 2019. A revolution that was led by all of the Sudanese population, specifically the women and the youth. And then after that, the sitting actually started in the 6th of April in front of the General Command headquarters in Khartoum and other cities also in Sudan. And then on the 3rd of June, the sitting was broke by a very bloody massacre in front of the headquarters. And then on the 30th of June, everyone thought that the revolution died, but the Sudanese people said no, and millions were in the street to first of all say, we are still here. You killed a lot of us in the massacre of the Setin Brok, but we are still here. And the 30th of June is actually the day when the coup in 1989 happened. So I think the process is just to prove that this day was the start of the darkness, but by our movement we will make sure that the light continues. And then we started a transitional period in end of August 2019. The transitional period was supposed to be actually 3 years, 1 year and a half, headed by the army for the protection reasons. Of course, did not happen. And then by the end of the 1 year and a half of the army-led government sovereign council, actually, a coup happened again in 25th of October 2021, without actually giving the leadership of the sovereign council to the civilians. And the idea was to prepare for the elections and the next steps for post-transitional period Sudan, but that didn't happen because of the coup. And a few months after that coup, actually 1 year and a few months, in April 2023, 15th of April to be precise, a war happened between the RSF and SAF, the army and the rapid support forces. Army led by General Burhan and RSF led by General Hemeti. And now, as I say most of the time, two generals are holding the lives of 42 million people as hostages in Sudan, with all of the high hopes and dreams of democratic developed countries with a very possible abilities and capabilities in terms of resources, in terms of human capital, and in terms of intelligence. This is just for people who are not in one page with us. And so now me and Annette were talking about how to make the peace building process after the war that happened more inclusive, how to go back to a civilian-led government and a democratic position, and of course how to include women more in the mediation processes, and of course post-war Sudan. But Annette, just also to be very much in line with the not only the goals of today, but also the goals of the Sudanese people and the high hopes of them also. What are your insights on the last meeting of and summit of IGAD? And I know you met General Hemeti there, so what can you share with us? What do you think is happening and will happen from your experience?
So if we go, if we come to the point where we focus on the two generals, as you said, what we need from them is to stop the war. What we don't need from them is to continue leading the country or being in control of the country. So I think what we've been trying to do with IGAD, with the regional organization or the regional multilateral organization in East Africa, is to get the two generals to sit, but not just to sit, but also to agree on a series of things, including ceasefire, including humanitarian access, because you said they're holding 42 million Sudanese hostage. More than almost 8 million are refugees and IDPs in their own country. We will see a massive humanitarian. There is a massive humanitarian crisis. We will see hunger in May. So it's a catastrophe, and we need them to stop the war for all of this to have a beginning of a political process. So back to the two generals, after 9 months of war, we need them to sit and agree on these three things. On ceasefire, we need them to agree on humanitarian access, and we need them to agree on a political process of a civilian-led government. Now, the hope for this meeting last week, heads of states meeting in Kampala, was for the two to join this meeting. Hemeti as the leader of RSF, and the two of them made the coup in 21. So both of them were part of this, what they felt was the government of the last 2 years. So Hemeti joined them, or was ready to join the meeting. And this caused, of course, an issue with Burhan, because, as you know, SAF is still feeling that they are the government and that they need to be treated differently than the militia leaders. So I think that was one of the questions raised by SAF. Why is Hemeti invited as a non-state actor to a heads of states meeting? Now, Hemeti was there, Burhan didn't come. What we need now, after the heads of states of this region agreed to facilitate a meeting between the two in the next 2 weeks, what we need to hear now is from Burhan, what is the facilitation that he is looking for? What kind of format is he looking at? Is it a format where he meets Hemeti one-on-one with maybe one heads of state in the room? Is he looking for a format where he meets Hemeti with all the heads of states? These are the issues that were discussed, and the communique is not spelling this out, but this is something where we need to hear from Burhan. What is he ready to come out for? Hemeti made it quite clear that he's ready to speak. But what are the conditions? I think this is really something where we need to dig deeper. Of course, we're in full support of IGAD. As EU from the beginning, we were quite clear. This facilitation, mediation has to happen on the continent. It has to be Sudanese-led, but it has to happen by the region and by the continental organizations, by IGAD and the AU. And I think this is where we are back now. But of course, the big question is, what takes it for the two to come together? And then not just to come together, because I think that's not enough for the two to meet. I think it's also, one needs to be very clear what these next steps should entail, how to get to a ceasefire, what kind of guarantees, monitoring, what does it take from the international community, to get to be guarantors to a process. And of course, on the question of humanitarian access and the question of a civilian leadership or civilian transition, I think there we need to prepare. Everyone needs to prepare. But this was basically the meeting that took place last week in Kampala. You muted, Nisreen.
Classic. I was actually in Port Sudan a few days ago, and I've met some people and I've talked to them, and also from social media, because currently social media is our parliament. But this is also one of the biggest questions that we are facing and biggest problems, because media is very polarized, and there is all sorts of misinformations, disinformations, and there's all sorts of trying to drag people to one side of the story, rather than put in the logical informations, put in the logical ideas, and looking to the way forward. Currently, I think one of the biggest questions that people have, does Hemeti and Al-Burhan themselves have the say on who to meet and how to stop the war, or they are just representing or the face of a bigger mechanisms that's happening behind them? And if it's the second scenario, which everyone is talking about right now, the role of the others, that I don't want to say the elephants in the rooms, but I want to say the rhinos in the rooms that everyone knows exist, and they just decide to neglect their existence in the first place. Then how are we as mediators in general, the Sudanese, but of course international community, going to address these reigners that we know but we don't want to touch? And if these reigners are the actual decision makers in this process, then why we are not making steps to actually approach them, and how to approach them? But well, one of the other biggest issues that we are facing right now in Sudan, that the problem with RSF, especially from the media, became personal to a lot of people. because they see in the media, and of course not only in the media, it's actually happening in the ground. They see the soldiers of the RSF coming to their houses. They see the soldiers of RSF raping their kids and daughters and sisters and mothers and wives, etc. They see the soldiers of the RSF looting their houses, their cars, everything that they actually belong to, and there is incidents from the army itself, but these incidents are not well documented, are not well communicated in the media, and of course, to be very frank, it's not as big as these things that the RSF and the militia are doing. So right now, all of these human rights violations from different perspectives, gender-based violence, looting, kidnapping, and both sides have huge number of illegal arrests that are actually happening. And now also everyone is trailing their own laws to protect their own areas that they are controlling militarily. For example, I think they have in some areas that controlled by the RSF, they have actually permissions. So, for example, if you are in Tuti, which is the island on the Nile, if you want to go out of the island and come back, you need to get a permission from and they have a stamp and they have everything there. And it's the same in the areas where the army is controlling. Currently, there is a huge violations of not only human rights, but struggle on the civil society side. Activists cannot move, cannot gather. They are passing the law that they call suspicious faces. They are resolving all of the committees that happened from the time of the revolution. This war for me and for a lot of people from a perspective is not war between army and RSF. It's actually a war against the democratization of the political life. It's a war against the civilization of the political, and they are getting what they want, because now a lot of voices are saying, we wish we didn't do the revolution, we wish we never removed al-Bashir. And of course, these are people who are deeply misled by the current horrors of the war, because if they compared what's happening in al-Bashir time and what's happening now, of course any human will think that what's happening now is even worse. But this doesn't mean that we should go from bad to worse, or from worse to bad. We deserve as Sudanese a better future, a brighter future, where we have safety, where we have security, where we have enough food, where we have enough houses, when we have enough schools, when we have enough jobs, when we have enough factories, enough energy, enough medicines and hospitals. And taking this picture away of the people's eye is really devastating, because then who are you depending on if the people themselves don't think that democracy or civilization or civilian government should be there anymore? So one of my real recommendations in the general situation right now, not only for people who are hearing us, is the focus on how to bring the democracy and the civilization back. And of course, one of the things that we have to have an answer for is the reconciliation processes, the justice processes, because people, if they lost hope that justice will come one day, then they will tend to take justice by themselves, and then we will move to the Syrian story or scenario, the Somalian scenario, or any scenarios where people are heavily going to be armed in order to protect themselves or take justice or revenge from taking their house or raping their family members or whatever.
No, I think maybe 3 points to come back to what you said, because I think this risk is real. My belief is the question of accountability. We need to bring back the question of accountability rather than arming people to produce their own sense of justice. Because I mean, talking to the Somalis 2 weeks ago in Mogadishu, that's the message they have for the Sudanese. What they're saying is, look, what we had in a small scale in 1991. We destroyed basically everything, our whole social fabric. And it took us 30 years to come back to something that is not yet a full state. It's not yet, a society that discusses, that is open. And it took us 30 years of rebuilding this. So I think the risk you explained are very real. My sense is accountability can only happen once a civilian government is back in place, a democratic government is back in place, once people can rely on a justice system that is not an individual justice system, that is not coming from a sense of violence as a decision-making tool of the first rate. I think that is what we hope to get. When we say stop the war is the first, and then building this or supporting civilian democratic transition, I think this is really what is key. And the accountability question, of course, is also something, and you might have seen EU has put out sanctions today. Others have done so as well. It's also a reminder that, of course, accountability is something for the society, but it's also something that we're watching from outside. We need much more clarity and investigations on atrocities, on human rights atrocities, in all places, not just Darfur, in Khartoum, everywhere. And I think the question that you also talked about is, who is behind what? I think that question can only be solved by the Sudanese civilians take over the government. But in terms of who is behind what, I think this is why our sense has always been the African Union has the biggest tent, because everyone is there. Everyone in the region, out of the region, everyone who has close contacts to the belligerents, but also to the society is there. And I think this is where the international community has to hold, we have to hold ourselves accountable to what is happening on the ground. And of course, the two belligerents. So I think this is really, but I also believe that we should not let the responsibility of those who are waging the war, they are still agents of their own doing. So, whoever is behind them, if there is anyone behind them, they made the decision to go for war. They made the decision to go for the coup on 25th of October. There's responsibility that comes with that, and you cannot, they cannot just shed this. So again, the call really needs to be for a strong civilian front, for a very strong civilian-led democratic government. It seems to be very far-fetched from you've just been to Sudan. I think the devastation is so brutal, and it's not really anything we hear from the two sides that leads to an understanding that there is a future on talks about transitional justice, or talks about how federation, confederation, all of these issues that need to be discussed. We don't hear it. We just hear the blame that the other side is responsible for this war. Now we need to come beyond this. They need to come beyond this. They need to take responsibility. This is one. But I think we also need to look into what are the core issues that are key for this actually to happen. What are the core issues in terms of the leadership question that you raised? What are the core issues in terms of this transitional government in inclusivity? What kind of inclusivity can they agree on? And what kind of mechanisms of internal political accountability do you want to see? And maybe lastly, where do you see our role as an outsider, a neighbor, someone who has been, EU very supportive and member states very supportive of the revolution, but where we don't see ourselves as, as the actor in the middle. We do want to support the regional organizations, but of course it's a question that also the Sudanese have to guide us. Where do you want us to see? What do you want us to be more supportive on? Because our sense is, okay, we started a couple of consultations with civilians, but what is the next step?
Yeah, and I think maybe we can end with this next step, although I wanted to speak about other topics that were overruled by the war, like climate change, like food security, like water security, because these are also existent threats for peace. But now, because we have ongoing clashes, these topics are not only off the table, but it went very low in the hierarchy of the priorities. But I don't think we have enough time for that, so maybe we can keep the discussion about the other security threats topics to another maybe session. But to answer to your question, first of all, yes, we really appreciate the EU role, not only now, but since the revolution and the transitional period. I think, and I think we also had this discussion before. I mean, as a person who is in these corridors for a while now, I understand the bureaucracy and that the EU is a big body with different member states, and all the member states need to agree on before taking any steps and so on. But I can tell you from what I see and from the feeling in the atmosphere in general, and from the discussions that I had with young people, we are going into another Rwandan situation. And remember, Rwanda was 1994, where they didn't have machine guns or weapons, and they didn't have social media to even increase the situation and so on. And yet it was a huge situation and a massacre that no one even wants to speak about again. It's really important, not only for me, but for the other young people, to know that institutions and bodies are ready to take not only radical, but step movements to tackle things, ready to explore new partners to work with, ready to get included with other actors, young people, women groups, other NGOs, going around the reporting systems, the normal reporting systems, because this are not normal systems and circumstances. The flow of not only financial, but of course technical support also. I mean, there is a lot of things that it could be done, but it's not being done, not because there is no resources, but there is a lot of bureaucratical barriers to that. And I really think that things should be more dynamic in this dynamic situation, because things in Sudan are moving very fast. And I really hate to disappoint the hopes of young people, that I think now more than 500,000 actually left the country to other countries, neighboring countries and so on, trying to find a house and work and get their kids to schools, but it's of course not also going very well. So maybe issues like employment in other countries and reallocation and other things like this should be also discussed and put in the table. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, both of you. And sorry for already having to come to an end. We want to keep our promise to stay within 1 hour, although I have the feeling that we have just only started, and it would be very interesting to now dig deeper into different of the topics you touched upon, and also to go a bit more into what your ideas of solutions are. Thank you so much for having this discussion. At least I learned a lot, and I just try to summarize my highlights from the discussion. On the one hand, you both said that it's everyone's responsibility to include, and it is that everyone should be prepared for the time after the war to take civilian leadership. At the same time, Nisreen, you said that actually at the moment it is not the question of inclusivity, which is the most important one, but it's rather the topic of leadership in general, and that it is also important to maybe deconstruct the perspective of who is currently representing power within the different fractions, where especially social media might give a not exact or fake picture of. So it's important to look at the others behind those who have who seem to have the power, those who have the strong voices. That's at least what I understood. And from the side of the EU, I understood that regarding inclusivity, that there need to be new questions asked in order to move away from the quantitative representation of women to something different, and that these questions still need to be found. Otherwise, you will probably still stay within this logic of yet another woman is brought to the table without any additional content that moves the process forward. And I also understood, and that was very interesting, and thank you for sharing it, Annette, that one of the most important questions is currently is whether the facilitation format can be agreed upon by everybody. And that's, of course, an interesting or a very important question. Thank you, both of you, and sorry for not having the time to come to all the other topics such as climate change and climate protection and everything that is, of course, also connected to the ongoing war. We have to come to an end here. I thank you very much. I thank all our listeners and guests for zooming in with us today. We will have a next tête-à-tête certainly within the next year, because this has become our special format, and we will invite you for that. In the meantime, do not hesitate to reach out to us should you be interested in our small but no less powerful network, should you be interested in our expertise, and of course we also thank all the other networks around us where we are linking up, and I think we are all moving towards women, at least high representation in networks and in professional learning exchange.